the 10th Clergy Couple webinar hosted by the Center for Family Care of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. These webinars are made possible by the generosity of Leadership 100, to whom we are very grateful, and they are specifically for clergy couples addressing issues, challenges, and blessings that are unique to the clergy couple and to the clergy family. The topic for today, the unique gift of the special needs child in the clergy family, is a response to some of the feedback that we have gotten from previous webinars, and this was a topic that was requested. We are very happy today to welcome Father Stephen and Pani Daria Loposky, who are with us. They have 4 children, ranging in ages from 12 to 19, and one of their children is a child with special needs. So they are living this life of having the gift of a child with special needs. Father Stephen has served in parish ministry, and for the last 9 years, he has been the director of Camp Nazareth Conference and Retreat Center, where he and Pani serve together. And they are in the Carpatho-Russian Diocese of America, which is under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Welcome. We are really, really glad to have you. And they're going to tell us a little bit more about themselves after I just cover one housekeeping item. And that is, if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type in these questions. We will address them throughout the webinar, and then if needed, we will have some extra time at the end for questions and answers. Welcome, Father Stephen and Pani Daria. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you especially for letting us be a part of this, and for being a part of this particular webinar. Of course, it hits close to home for us. Very grateful for the opportunity, and for those that we don't know that are joining us today, and for those that might find it beneficial to watch this when it's archived. Just a little bit more background on both of us. I was an accounting major in college. Went to a Jesuit school for accounting and worked for a bank for a while after graduating. Before I answered the call to go to seminary, eventually went to St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, where I met Pani Daria eventually, and was there for 4 years before being sent out to our first parish assignment, which was in Corning, New York. We were there for 11 and a half years. All of our children were born there. And then I was assigned, as Carrie said, to be the director of our diocesan youth camp called Camp Nazareth Retreat and Conference Center.
My background is I have an early childhood degree, and I have been a nanny. I've been a preschool teacher. I've been a church school teacher. I've been a director of a Head Start daycare center up in Portchester, New York. I was a Head Start teacher here in Mercer, and I was also an assistant to a special ed classroom. I worked for about 4.5 years, not only at camp, but as a Head Start teacher, but now I'm full-time here at camp.
So we've shared ministry together in parish life, and we certainly share ministry at Camp Nazareth together. While it's not official, while I'm called the director, our Metropolitan Gregory is very fond of saying that the director is here and the assistant director is here. So we've shared a wonderful ministry together, and Joshua, our third child, who is our middle son, has been a huge part of that ministry. He happens to have Down syndrome. He's now 17 years old, will be turning 18 in March, and is going to be graduating high school, which is hard for us to believe. He'll be graduating high school in May. But he's been an integral part of our ministry that we've sort of come to understand and grow in and mature in with him, and honestly, in many ways, because of him. And that's part of what will be our sort of talk today. But we wanted just to say that there are, many different kinds of unique and special needs out there. They're categorized by government agencies. They're categorized by the Americans with Disabilities Act. They're categorized by the American Medical Association. They're categorized by the Social Security Administration. They refer to them as disabilities and impairments. Pani and I, we don't look at things the same way as we did, and we don't look at things as agencies do. Our son Joshua happens to have Down syndrome, but if you talk with both of us, and this might come out during our webinar today, we don't look at Joshua as disabled anymore. I, at my time, might have. Pani was ahead of me in so many different ways, and my head and heart had to catch up to hers, and you'll see that as we go through. But there are many different sort of categories of things, and we're going to share a story with you, our sort of story, and make some points and point out some of the challenges and opportunities in the life of a clergy family that may resonate with you. If you have a child who has special or unique needs, or if you're tuning in and you don't have a child that has special or unique needs, but you're learning more about what it means in your parish to minister to a family who happens to have a child who has special or unique needs.
A little about our background leading up to Joshua. I had lived at St. Vladimir Seminary for 30 years of my life until we were transferred to Corning. But while we were at St. Vladimir's, our first year, we lost our daughter, Catherine. She was a stillborn of an umbilical cord accident. And so as a mother, a teacher, it was very difficult for me at that time. Didn't know really what was going on or why. Had a lot of questions of why this, why that. But I did know that we needed to be at the seminary. We needed to be surrounded by the priests, by our community because of that. And so four years after that, Joshua, we found out that he had a heart defect.
And this is while he was still in the womb.
Right.
Through sonogram and through other testing like that.
And we did not want to get any further testings. Our doctors were insisting, you need to get an amniocentesis. We need to know why he has that heart defect. And, I think I look back at it, and it's not that I didn't want to know. I think I just trusted in God that it was going to be okay. Something just was leading me to, and I don't know if it revolved around, when my daughter had died and I knew we were okay, and that's why we moved to Corning, but I just believed in it. So we didn't go for all the testing. We didn't want him labeled while I was pregnant. But they did believe that there was some type of chromosome disorder, but until we got the test, we wouldn't know. So when Joshua was born, I would say he was born, he scored high on his APGAR test, and he was perfect. In my eye, he was perfect. There was nothing wrong with him, even though I knew something was wrong with his heart. And I remember that they said they had to take him to be evaluated, so they took him to the nursery to be evaluated. And Steve and I were just talking about this today, that, we sat there waiting, and we remember the doctor coming in and pausing and looked at us and said, your child, we think, has Down syndrome.
And he waited. And the indication to Daria and I was that, and this was like the first of challenges faced, at least after Joshua was born. He paused, and the indication was, do you want him? He has Down syndrome. Do you want him? And we looked at each other, and we looked back at the doctor, and we said, so?
Right, and we cried. We held each other and cried.
Because
it wasn't out of sorrow. It was actually out of just relief and thanking God that he was going to live.
He was going to live.
It was Down syndrome. Okay, let's move on. Let's start. Let's go.
We knew that other chromosome disorders, child might not live outside of the womb. Child might live a few hours outside of the womb.
And that was a possibility.
Live a few days outside of the womb. Because we didn't get the amniocentesis, we didn't know. But they wouldn't have changed the treatment had any of those other disorders been the case. They wouldn't have changed anything that they did for us, anything to do with the preparations in case something went wrong with Joshua's heart after he was born. But we looked at each other and cried because we were grateful that we had a child who would live. And Down syndrome didn't matter to us. Daria looked at Joshua from the beginning as not a child with a disability, but simply as a child. And that was sort of the first thing we sort of faced as a couple who had another child. This was after Samuel came around, and it was after Catherine had died as a stillborn. We were grateful to God. He is a merciful God, and it's one of those things that we want to stress as we go through this webinar together, that sometimes we may forget, and it may be hard because we have a child who has unique and special needs that requires more time and energy and thought and care, and it might be adaptive medical equipment, and it might be medicines, and it might be more attention and whatever else. But God is our very good God and very merciful God, and when he gave us Joshua, he was very merciful to us because of what we had been through. And so we cried tears of relief and tears of joy when Joshua was born and brought back into us after he was sent out for his sort of testing. And this is sort of a segue into, I think, our first point together, that with a child with unique or special needs, there's more going on there than meets the eye or the ear in your life, in our life, in your life with a child who has unique or special needs. There's actually a vocation there that you may not see. And we've come to live it. I mean, Josh is 17 now, going on 18, going to graduate from high school. We've seen it. We're still living it. There's a vocation there, we believe, in the child who has unique or special needs to inspire, to teach, to bring joy in a way that maybe otherwise wouldn't be in the world. So there's more going on there, and God has a plan for that. Right off the bat, he has a plan for that, and he knows it. And we have to discover it. We have to see it. We have to accept it and live it. And I did tell Carrie earlier before we got on, Pani, you may see one or both of us cry during the webinar. I will recover, at least I will try if I do. But it's because this is powerful for Daria and I. Living with Joshua is a powerful experience for us, one that is a true vocation, parentally and in the parish and in our life, wherever the priestly ministry, wherever the clergy ministry, wherever the clergy family ministry calls us to. But God has that plan for us, and we've discovered it over time and enjoyed every step of the way, even though there's been challenges, and they were right off the bat.
Have you had a chance to tell this story before to lay people or to other clergy in a group type of a setting? Or is this the first time you're really telling your story out loud together?
First time. And as I was telling my husband today, that it's been a challenge for me to do this, and I may be quiet. You may see me very quiet at times, because I guess I've never told it, because I just never thought of him as different. I know he's a special needs child, but I never considered him that way in my heart, I think. And I mean, I've gone through the testing. We've gone through lots of being an advocate and stuff, but actually saying it and telling people, it's the first time.
The first time together. We had opportunity at a youth and camp workers conference back in February, I think, of 2018 was the first time that I spoke about it in this way, Carrie, sort of publicly to a group. And it was the same, developing that talk and bouncing ideas off of Daria. It was a powerful experience. And it brought up stuff that, you maybe didn't think about before in this particular way, that, you're challenged right from the beginning, but you see a vocation as time passes. And as basic as this sounds, and I know it's probably, especially for clergy that are listening, as basic as this is going to sound to you, I'm going to say it anyway. You and your child who happens to have special needs or unique needs church. And I know I'm talking to clergy, and I know I'm talking to clergy wives, that we are. But I think sometimes in the work, we forget. And Pani and I talked about this earlier. If St. Paul said that while he was helping others, he had to make sure that he didn't lose his own salvation, and he says it, and I can't remember where in his epistles, and it's paraphrased, but he says that while I'm working for the salvation of others, I can't lose salvation. If a prime apostle had to worry about it, then we as clergy and clergy families need to worry about it, that we're not losing our salvation while we're helping others achieve it. But your child needs church, and he or she needs church in church and at home. And this is why I think they do. Because your child with unique needs may not be able to tell you, may not be able to cognitively carry on a conversation about church life to them or whatever. But church life gets in. God sees fit to have your child receive what they need to receive from the sacraments, from the church services, from interaction with peers, from interaction with parishioners, activities and youth events and whatever else. He sees fit to get in what needs to get in, even though your child may not give any indication that something of the life of faith is getting in. So very basically, your child needs church, in church and at home.
We were very blessed that when Joshua was born, our parish, they were amazing in Corning. Joshua, 2 days after he was born, actually had to be rushed down to New York City. We were 4.5, 5 hours away from New York City. And we picked that hospital because my family was from around there because of a possible bowel obstruction. And in Corning, they weren't able to handle that. They weren't sure if he needed exploratory surgery and stuff. So he was rushed down to the hospital, and my brother and sister-in-law I called was, please be there for him. I won't be able to. I'm still getting discharged from the hospital. But please, even though you can't see him, just be with Joshua there. And I remember we were down in the hospital for 2 weeks. Father was going back and forth from the hospital back to Corning to serve liturgy, to go back. And I remember the parish just starting a fund, a scholarship fund for him.
Yeah, they called it the Joshua Fund, and it was sort of unbeknownst to us.
Right. They just started, and I think, we were very blessed to have a parish like that. They just were always, trying to help us and wanting to make sure, once they knew that Josh was okay, then they wanted to make sure that he was could be continued okay.
Yeah, and they established that fund. They even, when they found out he had breathing issues, and we were down there for 2 weeks right after he was born in New York City, and like Pani said, it was close to her family, so we had Samuel, so Samuel had a home to stay in instead of a hotel, and we could take care of his needs, and I could be at least close enough 4.5 hours away to get back to Corning when I needed to. But the parish, even after Josh got back home, when they found out that he had breathing issues, they started the process of converting the heating and cooling system in the parish house to an HVAC system so that it could have air conditioning. So in the hot summer months that were going to be up and coming, he wouldn't have to labor in a home that was, more humid and hotter, wouldn't have to labor to breathe. But we were blessed with that. And it's one of the reasons why we can, say during the webinar, there's a vocation there that the child has that instructs and teaches and helps people along, parishioners specifically, along the path of salvation. It's very similar in a certain way to the 99 and the 1. Josh isn't lost, but he's the one that has to be waited for. He's the one that has to be ministered to. He's the one that has to, you sort of drop everything else. And when you see your parishioners sort of responding to that, it brings great joy to the heart. And you realize that, again, there's something more going on there than meets the eye. It's not a child with a disability. It's a child with a vocation. And it changes the perspective, and it changes your way of looking at things, and it changes your sort of whole way of ministering as a clergy couple to one another and to parishioners, and frankly to anybody else that comes into contact with you and your son or daughter who happens to have these unique or special needs. I don't know.
What would you attribute to this real outpouring of love on the part of the parish family? Because there's some clergy who might experience that kind of outpouring of love, and then others where parishes won't know what to do, and people are afraid and they might not reach out, or there may not be that kind of an outpouring of love. How did you communicate your needs to the parish? How did they then respond, or were other people communicating what your needs were at the time, or what the situation was at the time?
Yeah, there's a lot there, Carrie, and it's something that Daria and I talked about. We had been in the parish already. When Joshua was born, he was born in 2001. We had been in the parish since 1998. So we had been there for a little while, and, well, you build up trust. You let, in our experience, you let parishioners see your family life in reality. We never really tried to be anything other than we were. Obviously, priest and priest family, parents trying to raise a believing child, at that time, Samuel, while still recovering from having lost Catherine. And that continues to this day for us. Catherine was a honeymoon baby. She was born almost 9 months to the day after Pani and I were married. And almost 9 months to the day after we were married, we were burying our first child, carrying her out of church. I carried her out of church in her little casket while my wife was being carried out by her brother and father because she could barely walk. But communicating those things to the parishioners in a very real and open way, which makes you vulnerable to criticism, to comment, to judgment. Well, that's one of the crosses that we as clergy and clergy families bear. We're sort of out there, so to speak, publicly, in a leadership position, in a vocation and a calling, in a calling and a vocation. And you have to be willing to trust and communicate. And Pani has always been a good communicator. Always. You want to tell them about Charlie?
Well, when we got to Corning, I think when you had asked about trust and stuff, one of the parishioners' sons, grandson even, he was a founding father.
Yeah, one of the founding fathers of the parish.
Their son was Down syndrome too. So Charlie was 8 years
8
old
maybe.
when we first got there.
And he was serving on the altar.
He was serving on the altar. I think, that just how we communicated with the family and how we treated Charlie,
help build trust.
Right.
So that when the time came, there was the understanding that the clergy family values every child,
Right.
values every parishioner. Charlie was only serving half the liturgy at the time when I got there, and I asked him on the first Sunday, I said, "You want to serve the whole liturgy?" He said, "Sure." And he started serving the whole liturgy. There were times when he would have to remove himself. He got too tired or whatever else, but that happened for 2 years prior to when Joshua was born. And we both talked about it. It just took time, Carrie. It took time and effort to build up that trust and to build up that this family cares for us. The clergy family cares for us. And frankly, we care for them. And we would have stayed in Corning. Hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn. We would have stayed in Corning for our whole ministry together unless we had been specifically assigned someplace else. In this particular case at Camp Nazareth. But the experience may not be the same, but I think the principles apply. There has to be the buildup of trust over time. There has to be the care for, and we never would have thought treating Charlie the way we did. We had obviously no clue. We're going to also have a son who has this unique and special need, but again, who has this unique and special vocation. And so it worked in our particular circumstance. It worked. And that's why we can say that God is merciful and God is good. And he took care of us in ways that we couldn't possibly understand. And that would sort of lead us maybe to our next sort of point, that Joshua was given to us for our salvation. And we were given to him for his salvation. And he was given to the parish for their salvation. And they were given to him for his salvation. In other words, again, that is all connected in a vocation that is a powerful witness to the love of God. In the marriage sacrament, it says that we petition God that he would grant to the newly married couple or to the couple to be married children, as in the translation that I use, as is expedient for them. And what does that mean, children as is expedient for them? Well, children for their salvation. Children to bring them to the kingdom of heaven. Children whom they can point the way to. This is the way to the kingdom of heaven. But the parish needs to see the challenges you face. It needs to see you ministering to your own. You need to be open about that. And that's not always easy when you can incur judgment or criticism. Why can't your child stay quiet in church? And that just doesn't go for a child with unique or special needs, but say that you have a child that just, yells in church or calls out, or because of ADD or ADHD can't sit still. It's not their fault. And it's hard because you have to be willing to be a little bit vulnerable, and they have to be willing to see your struggles as parents. We're just parents. We're not Father and Pani, Father and Presbytera, Father and Huria. We're mom and dad to a child. But we can tell you that
I really...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. We have a little bit of an internet problem on my end. Forgive me, everybody. I'm really appreciating your language of vulnerability and transparency, and how important that is in discerning how much and when and to whom and how to be part of this family, parish family that we have been called to as a clergy family, and how important that is. Because oftentimes we want to put our guards up And sometimes our guards and our walls get thicker and thicker as time goes on, and perhaps we are hurt, or somebody has crossed a boundary or something that, so sometimes we build these thicker walls. But what I'm hearing from you is that this transparency and vulnerability is part of the mutual exchange of the clergy family with the parish family, and how important that is for building trust and for building mutual love between the two.
Right.
Yeah, and that goes for any time, regardless of whether you have a child with unique or special needs. But frankly, with a child with unique or special needs, there's already weakness, as it were. Joshua had heart surgery at
4.5 months.
4.5 months old, right back at the hospital we had been at for the first 2 weeks of his life. They had to build walls inside of his heart because it wasn't formed properly. A typical defect for a child who has this chromosome disorder, an ASD-VSD defect in the heart, where there's not 4 chambers, there's only 2, and there's issues with valve. And so he's on the operating table at 4.5 months old. So there's already weakness, Carrie. You know, you either face it and see it for what it is, that God's strength is made perfect in weakness, or you try to hide it as though it's something to be ashamed of or something that you shouldn't let people know, and as though nobody else is going through it. But Daria will tell you how many others were there going through.
But talk about weakness, you know, I think also, you know, what I witnessed from the day Josh was born, I think he gave me the strength. Just like when he was in the hospital when he was born for two weeks, and there was one day that I had not gone to the hospital, and every 30 minutes something was wrong with him. Every 30 minutes something was wrong with him. Steve would call and say, this is wrong, this is wrong. And then out of the blue, 2 days later from that day, they're like, Joshua is fine, there's nothing wrong, he's going home, he's being discharged. So just that's how his life started. And then with his open heart surgery, it was amazing. And, you know, I even remember my father getting so nervous because on Wednesday he had the surgery, and Friday he was out of the ICU unit, going down to step down. And my father's like, what do you mean they're he's out of ICU? He just had open heart surgery. And the doctors are like, no, he recovered so quickly. You know, there were children and mothers who were near us who their child had not woken up yet from anesthesia after a week. A week
later.
You know, and here's our son Josh, who was like, I'm, open heart surgery. Wednesday, Friday, I'm out of ICU, and Monday we're home. We're leaving to go back to Corning.
5 days after he had open heart surgery, and there was strength there that we couldn't see,
right?
And gift there that we couldn't understand. And it doesn't mean that God wasn't being merciful to those others. There were children in the same room as Joshua who had heart surgery weeks before, and whose tubes had not come out of their chest yet because their chest was still draining. And Daria got close with some of these families. I got so nervous and so scared for my son that my back seized up. There were 2 days where I couldn't go to the hospital during that heart surgery, and Pani was there getting to know these families that were near Joshua and hearing their stories. And there were stories of, where it just made you cry. There were stories of great hope, and there were stories of strength, and stories of strength made perfect through weakness. And, again, she was willing to communicate and willing to be vulnerable and talk with others about her own sons. And then she heard other stories, and these stories got communicated back to the parish by us. Joshua was home with us 5 days later after open heart surgery, but there were children who were still in the hospital, who still needed our prayers, whom we kept in prayer, and whom we asked the parishioners to keep in prayer. So there are those moments where you realize you have to be open, and it leads to good things. And
And over these few years when you were still in Corning and in parish life, did you let the parish know specifically what different needs were over the course of these years? Did people ask you, what are your needs and how can we support you through this? How did that interchange take place with your parish? That sounds as if, I mean, from the beginning, there was a huge outpouring of love, which I'm sure continued, but how was what was needed communicated?
I think through all of us, not only Father, myself, but I mean, I even think through our kids, we were blessed. We were very blessed because not only was there another child with a special needs in the parish, but we also had two very prominent people in the parish that worked in was either a special ed teacher or worked with special needs families and adults. So God was merciful to us because he knew what we needed and when we needed and where we needed to be. And I think all of that really, I don't think we ever expressed it because I think they just were, I would be in church and I had a parishioner holding Josh half the service, and she just kind of took him, as one of her own, as, this is, it was never communicated as in, I need this, I need that, I need that. I think maybe as we just were with them in the parish and they saw Joshua, or he was always at pierogi sales. He was always, I worked also part-time when Josh was first born until my third son, Nicholas, came along. Then I was stayed home the full time. But he was in church for all liturgies with Father, and parishioners took care of them.
Yeah, I Carrie, that it's not one thing, it's many things. It's not something that I could say like zeroing in on. There was sort of a broader picture, but I love to tell stories, and I love being a parent. I love being a dad, let's say. I just love being a dad. My dad loved being a dad. And I got that from him. He loved time with his children. And, I would tell the parishioner stories of Joshua, of Sam, and then, of course, of Nicholas and Anna when they came around. But lots of different stuff, everything from, really the joys of being a dad to like the difficulties. I remember holding Joshua in the rectory, trying to get him to latch on to a bottle. Down syndrome, a child who has Down syndrome oftentimes has low muscle tone all over the body, but especially in the facial muscles, which makes it difficult to latch onto a bottle. And I remember becoming incredibly frustrated with that as a dad. Why can't my son latch onto this bottle and just take this milk? And I remember it vividly because it sort of seared in. Like, why is it dribbling down the side of his mouth and down his chin? Why can't he just take this bottle? Well, that got communicated to parishioners. My frustration just as a dad. And I remember telling people about it because we had other children in the parish whose fathers were going through frustrations with their own kids about, goodness knows what, a teenager or whatever else. And I was never afraid to share those stories because I just love being a dad. There were frustrating times and still are, whatever, but there were other stories too of just funny things that Joshua would do. Like Joshua, for whatever reason, I don't know why, we don't know why, but he liked to lay on the floor and arch his body. He would be on his belly and he would arch himself, and I don't know how he did it. His back muscles must have been so strong. Yeah, muscle tone, forget about, low muscle tone. This guy's back muscles must have been, super strong because he could arch himself in sort of a U, and he just liked to sort of teeter-totter back and forth on the floor in that sort of shape of a U.
And I'm sure in the hall during pierogi sales and stuff,
that's what Joshua would be
doing on the stage where we had like a playpen and area set up for him, and they would see it. The parishioners would see it.
We were never afraid, and to this day, of sharing Joshua with our parishioners and with our family and with others, because we do believe he has a vocation, and he does inspire, and he does bring joy to people. And that's his gift. And there are many other gifts, and there are other circumstances. And now I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning. There are many different kinds of labeled disabilities and impairments. Joshua happens to have Down syndrome. He happens to have that particular chromosome disorder. There are other kinds. And for other families, they have a different circumstance, but some of the lessons stay true. And here's one of the other things that we'd like to just sort of offer to those that are listening, to those that will see this later. Don't let all the evaluating and testing and poking and prodding and whatever else cloud your vision of what's really going on in your child's life. You're going to be evaluated by therapists, by doctors, by specialists, by agencies, by whatever else. See your child for what they are, for what your son or daughter is, a blessing in your life, a gift from God, truly, no matter what you think you see with your eyes, no matter what you think you hear with your ears. Don't let the clinical nature of what has to happen for your child be all there is. Your home might seem to become a clinic with therapists and whatever else. It's a real challenge, but your home is not a clinic. It's a mini church. And you have to remember this, and it goes back to the first point for us as clergy and clergy families. Don't lose your salvation because somebody's evaluating your child and labeling them as having this disability or this impairment or whatever. And don't become discouraged, because sometimes it can be, it was discouraging. Oh, your child is 5 years old, but developmentally.
Right. I wanted to tell a story when you brought that up, is that, and I think this is when it really changed for me, is that Joshua was 2 years old, and we were going through therapies. And before that, he did not like it. He definitely was not into the, being told, or, you have to sing, or you have to do this, you have to do the blocks and all that. But while the speech therapist was evaluating, he had to do a specific task at that specific time, and he had to get it accomplished. And if he didn't get it accomplished, it was marked not accomplished, and that means his age was different than
developmentally. Yeah.
So he was told, they said, you need to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And Josh did it. He just sat there. He couldn't sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And the evaluation was over, and then we had the team meeting, and we went around the room, and the speech therapist said, well, Joshua is basically developmentally 6 months old. And one of the things that was really what would you say, sort of the why he was this was because he couldn't sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And I looked at them and I said, I understand that. I go, but he in his own way can say Our Father.
And sing the Our Father.
And right then and there, that's when I knew, because I heard him, I would hear him singing, and I was like, you're seriously telling me that he's 6 months old because he can't sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but he can say Our Father. And I think
and sing it.
That's where I knew. I actually, to me, I don't know why I deserve Joshua, because, I look at that and say, how, this child at 2 years old can sing it in his way. And that's what I realized was the most important. And from then on, I went through, and I'm a huge advocate for Joshua. I get him whatever he needs. We go through his IEPs and all of his services, and I am right there for him and fighting for him. However, I look at it also as, but that's not what it's all about. I know he needs to survive in today's society with the services, but that's not what it's truly about. What it's truly about is he can sing Our Father at 2 years old.
Yeah, and for us, it became apparent that, again, there was more going on there than met the eye. Pani would go to work in the morning when she was working at the daycare program, and I would take Sam and Josh to weekday liturgies in car carriers, and just walk them up the stairs and put them in the altar while I did proskomedia until parishioners got to church. And I would do the proskomedia, and they would look around, and they were sort of quiet children. They didn't disturb anybody or anything. That was Sam and Josh, our first two. And, you know, and then I would sing to them in the altar, and they would look around, and they would fall asleep and look around and fall asleep. And then when parishioners got there, I would take them out and, you know, say, would you hold, you know, the children, or just look after them? And they were good about that. But more was getting in than we ever knew. And when that happened, and Pani reminded me of this, I didn't even remember this, you know, the light turned on. Okay, don't let the testing and evaluating, which is necessary to access funding and agency support, and medical equipment and all of the like. And you got to go through all that stuff as a parent of a child who has unique and special needs. I mean, your child needs this stuff, and so you become an advocate, and you fight, and you work the system, and you learn, and you become knowledgeable and all of that. But in the midst of all of that, there's something else that is going on, and no amount of labeling and no amount of sort of pigeonholing sometimes should take that away from you. As a parent of a child with unique or special needs, that should not be. And it's not that the agencies are trying to do that. That's not what I mean. It's just that we can forget. They're doing their job. They're helping your child, and you need them. But there's also something greater, you know, that's happening at that time.
Bring up camp now.
Joshua, you know, flipped to whatever, 15 years later. Joshua is leading evening prayers at camp, at cabins, for all of the teenagers, for all of those that are younger than teens. And he's doing the priest part, and he's doing it flawlessly. Where does that come from? I mean, obviously there's prayer in the home. Obviously there's prayer in church. But, you know, you ask him to sing, well, these days, you know, he can sing more than just church music. I mean, he's a big fan of John Denver and his music and whatever else. And in good voice, Bishop Metropolitan Gregory, our bishop, calls Joshua the auxiliary bishop of Mercer, which is the town that we live in. The auxiliary bishop of Mercer and all the swimming pool. And he is. He inspires in his own way. And I never would have thought, you know, at one time in my life as a dad, forget about me as a priest, if I could, I never thought I would live to see the day when my child would be celebrated in a particular way. Not patronized, not pitied, not looked on with sympathy, but called for. Can you send Josh to cabin 3 to do evening prayers with the campers? Of course. In fact, they don't even ask anymore. And Joshua doesn't even ask. He just goes. And so there's a blessedness, but we never would have thought it. But there were many steps along the way that led to it. And it's because we never, maybe I did. I don't think Pani ever did. Pani never lost sight of the fact that there was more going on there in Joshua's life than simply being evaluated by therapists and doctors and the rest. So don't forget, you know, what's really happening, and that maybe leads us to maybe one of the final points, Carrie, for us.
Could I ask a question, please?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Before you go on to the next thing, could I please ask? So I'm hearing the incredible blessing and life that Josh has brought to both your home, your personal home, as well as your parish home. And that not to lose sight of the larger picture of who he is as a person made in the image of God, when evaluations come in and those sorts of things. Now, when some of the evaluations were really difficult, even having in sight the larger picture, how did you get through some of those things?
Tears. I'm not going to lie, you know, doubts, tears. It was very difficult, you know. there were times I think I would just get in a ball or fall and just cry. Why me? Why did this happen? And but I think it still led me to, yes, I think I was vulnerable and I had to do that, but I still in my heart knew that
for me, Carrie, it was we needed support and help. We needed, okay, your son has low muscle tone in his cheeks and jaw. You need to develop this in order for him to be able to talk to you. Well, that resonated. I want my son to talk to us. He may not be able to talk as my son Sam talks. I may not always understand Josh, and this is a frustration. You know, my kids can, his siblings can understand Josh better than I can sometimes. And I'll look to them and say, what did Josh just say? And I know Josh gets frustrated with me, where I don't understand what he's telling me, and I'll tell him, okay, no, say it again, you know, but okay, you know, we used to put Slim Jims in the freezer. And this is what the therapist told us to do, Carrie. Put Slim Jims in the freezer, and they're frozen, and then you put them, forgive me, you put them in the side of the mouth, and you let him chew on them like a chewy toy to build up strength. And you do this 3 times a day, and for this long. And prior to him eating, this is what you do on both sides of the mouth, and it's going to help him develop. And why the Slim Jim? Because it had flavor. And to this day, Josh, he likes spicy food, and we attribute it to him as an infant even, chewing on Slim Jims, just sort of gumming them to build up strength. It's because the agencies, the therapists told us, you have to do this in order for the next step to happen. And even as parents, sometimes when we would be in our, I won't speak for Pani, I'll speak for me. When I was in my worst moments of self-pity, why can't my child latch onto this bottle? Still, the therapist would say, well, this is next, and this is what you have to do for your son. Of course, you love your child, so you just do it, you know. But there were times, honestly speaking, where I didn't want to put the Slim Jim in. I didn't want to go through this. I just want to feed my son. Just want to give him the spoon. Well, you can't give him the spoon, and you can't give him the spoon in the same way that you give Sam the spoon, because you've got to tip it upside down so it helps form the mouth properly. Can I just give him the spoon? No, you can't, Steve. You've got to turn the spoon over so that it presses that soft palate up to form it properly. You have to form the palate with your thumb. You know, you have to do this on a day-to-day basis to help that palate be in the right position so that he'll be able to communicate with you better. There were times where, Carrie, I'm just going to leave off with that and not do it because I don't want to have to do it anymore. But you would recover eventually, and that's all by the grace of God. That's all by God's mercy. There's nothing else that we can attribute that to. It's not by our strength. It's not by our willingness. It's not by our love. It's just by the mercy and grace of God that he helped us, you know. But I think the point there is part of it is, and it was the next point I was going to make, and thank you for asking the question. As parents of a child who has special or unique needs, you have to be patient. You have to be a lifelong learner, and you have to be humble. The sort of analogy that I gave Daria, that's sort of in my mind, if having children is a classroom, which I think it is, I think parenting is the great adventure. To raise a believing child is a great adventure. A serious adventure, but it's a great adventure. But if having children is a classroom, and as parents we know it's instructive to us, it instructs us on the way to salvation, I think having a child with special needs is like having extra help after school, is like having a tutor in your own house, leading you on the path of salvation. That's the analogy I would sort of offer. And frankly, Carrie, I don't know about Daria, but I need the extra help. And I never realized it that way until maybe in the last couple of years. I need the extra help. I need the tutor in my house after school instructing me on this path that, you know, frankly, sometimes I would wander on and not know about. But that takes patience and humility and a commitment to sort of lifelong learning, which is also all a gift from God. And in that way, you know, you're sort of learning as you go, even to the point recently, something that we never thought we'd have to do.
Yes, his pediatrician had come up to me about a month and a half ago to tell me that she apologized that she didn't do this earlier, but Josh will be turning 18 in March, and that she really encouraged us to get guardianship over Joshua. It never occurred to us that we would have to get guardianship over him, but she said that when he turns 18, and if you don't have guardianship over him, you don't have a voice for him. There's no more voice.
You can't essentially be his parent anymore.
You know, everything would go to him. And Joshua is a very trusting and loving child. He likes to say yes.
Very agreeable. He's very agreeable.
So, you know, looking in, you know, and when she said that, I'm thinking, okay, so if he's going to the doctors and the doctor, you know, he just recently in the past year was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And I can just foresee the doctor saying, well, Joshua, I think you need medication. And he'll say, yes. You know, medication will help you feel better. Yes. Well, they'll put him on medication and we won't have anything to say with it. And so we are now in the process of getting guardianship over him.
Filing for guardianship. We have to go to court to do this. We have to engage the services of a lawyer. Otherwise, basically, Joshua would be assigned an advocate, assigned a lawyer to help him through life after the age of 18. Wasn't even on our radar. Right. Talk about lifelong learning. I had never heard this before up until a month ago. Right. From Daria. Never even thinking that would have to be the case for us. But talk about a challenge. Why do I have to, as a parent, do this? Well, that's the legal world we live in that is, in fact, protecting someone who has special or unique needs. And it's the country's way of doing this. And I wouldn't fault it for that. And I wouldn't fault the state for that in any way. They deal with all kinds of circumstances that are unknown to me, that are not Joshua's circumstances, that need this. Okay, so you become a lifelong learner and you accept and you're humble about that. Even as a parent, I have to file for guardianship, even though it grinds a little bit at you. Why would I have to do this? But it's just the reality of what you have to go through. Is Joshua affected by it?
No.
Just his parents. But that's okay. And that's the way it should be. You protect that vocation and you develop it as much as God gives you to develop it. And when the time comes, you file for guardianship when that's what you're asked to do, which is what we're being asked to do, now. But for us, that's a struggle. And you don't always know what's going on and what's going to come up. But when it does, you trust that it will be okay. And flip back to the first point. The child needs church at church and the child needs church at home. So do his parents, day in and day out, because there's so much more. And as clergymen and as clergy wives, as clergy families, we know the real battle that's going on for us. The real battle is against us by the evil one. And we have to be ready in every way.
And given everything you've said, I think I would add to that the church needs the child too.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a vocation there, Carrie, and it would be wrong, and we'll have to answer for it, frankly, if we don't grow up and mature, I'm talking about as parents, seeing it and then fostering it, asking God to reveal it and then fostering it and offering it in the way that it's meant to be offered. And if we don't, one, shame on us, and two, we'll answer for it, as we'll answer for every other one of our children. It's not just Joshua. What did you do with what I gave you? And the problem is that sometimes you don't know what you're being given with a child with special, unique needs. You see it only in the categories of evaluations and testing and whatever else. And it's, as Daria had said, it's so much more than that. And there's so much more happening there. I think maybe sort of where I would like I'm not sure where we are time-wise, Carrie, but where I'd like to sort of leave off with sort of my way of looking at things is just by asking sort of a question. And it's something that came up when we were preparing this together. Do we think that our children who have these unique and special needs will be any different in the kingdom of heaven? Will the need be gone? Will the chromosome disorder be gone? What of them will be revealed to us? And because I look at Joshua these days different than I did when I was a young dad, I look at him and I see the image of God in him, and I don't think he could get any more perfect. And I've come to the conclusion in my own life that I don't want him any different than he actually is right now in the kingdom of heaven. I don't want him any different. Sorry, because I think that there is a powerful vocation on earth, and there is a heavenly place for him where he will be an intercessor for others because his heart is that close to God. I don't want him to be any different in the kingdom. I wasn't that way when I was younger. I wasn't. I went through many sort of challenges as a dad and as a husband and as a priest. And I would just say that to my brother clergy that are listening, if you wouldn't yell at a mother who's not your wife, if you wouldn't yell at a mother in your parish, then don't yell at your wife as a mother when she's taking care of your children. And to the presbyteras and jurias and panis and clergy wives, I would say, like as a last message, if you wouldn't yell at another priest who's not your husband, don't yell at your husband who's a priest when it comes to raising your children. I think we have a double standard as clergy families, as clergy husbands and wives, and we don't see each other sometimes the way we should. We sort of let down our guard in that way, and we don't learn the lessons that we need to be taught, especially when it comes to raising a child who has unique or special needs, given the vocation in the family, given the vocation in the parish, and given the vocation that they have with everybody around them.
Thank you. There are a couple, actually, comment came in from a clergy wife who had a very similar experience about the guardianship and child in the ER, and the mother didn't have guardianship, and the nurse helped her through this and helped to go through the hoops to get the guardianship. So this mother was not told about it beforehand, so you are very blessed to know about it early on.
It takes time,
and,
yes.
A question that came in, do you feel that life became easier when you moved to Camp Nazareth rather than in the life of the parish? And I'm assuming that this is in regard to having a child with unique special needs.
More challenging for sure. In the beginning, I'm not going to lie, it was definitely more challenging. I didn't have the support.
Camp Nazareth?
Yes, at Camp Nazareth. I didn't have the support. You have to understand, off season from back then and in the early stages. Now we have more stuff going on throughout the year. But in the early stages, from September to May, we maybe had 3-4 events at the most. And our whole family was used to a community. And
at camp, there's only a few parishioners. We have services each week and holy days and feast days and whatnot, but there's only 4, let's say, or 6. So you don't have a community of support for you, and you don't see as, and don't feel that support as much.
But in season, it was overwhelming, because we had, between staff members and even clergy that would come and be there. They all helped us. There was one time, there were several stories of, I just would lose Josh, and, I became very protective. I will say this: once I lost Catherine, I did become a very protective mother, especially making sure that they wouldn't get lost or anything bad happen. And I remember not being able to find Josh on a campus. And we basically, I think I ran to Steve and I was like, Josh is gone and the woods are right there.
So Josh is gone. So I don't panic as much maybe as I should. So I said, okay, well, we'll send some staff members to look. And it turned out, and he had been gone for a while. And this was when Josh was younger. Josh was over at the bell tower of the church, sitting there, just sitting there by the church in the bell tower. And it reminded Pani and I of our Lord's parents looking for him, in Jerusalem, and then finding him in the temple and him saying to them, well, where do you think I would be?
Right. Yeah. I mean, because he just looked at us like, why are you what? I'm sorry.
It's fine, but, and Josh is not one that's going to go hiking without us. He's not going to do that. But he was just at the church. So it was it still is in a certain way more challenging. Not as much so now that he's older and can fend for himself, so to speak, more, and get places easier and get back and communicate better and whatever else. But in the beginning, without that community support, it was rough.
But now I look at it back, but when I see Joshua and how much he loves the camp, how much he loves the staff, I can't imagine us not being at camp per se. So the challenges now are so different from when we first got there.
He communicates with the staff more than we do.
Yeah.
Off season, he texts them constantly. So maybe too much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It almost feels like this is the beginning of a conversation.
Yes.
And I'm hearing so much of how blessed and how supported you have been in the communities that you have been a part of. The challenges of that support are different at the camp versus the parish. And I think not all of our clergy couples feel the same kind of support that you experienced. And I think that conversation about what that give and take looks like, so that we learn to love and support one another in time of need, clergy family and members of the parish family. And somehow much of the research shows that it takes 5 to 6 years for trust to build with a new pastor coming into a community of faith. I'm hearing that for you all, somehow that happened more quickly, so that when your need was there was trust that was built that helped to lead to the outpouring of love. So there was something that you all did in those short years that you were there before Joshua was born to build trust with your community of faith, with your parish family. So that's the part of the conversation that I think we need to continue at some point. But thank you for your story, for your transparency, your vulnerability, and what you have to offer to not just to those with children with unique needs, but also to all of us. I mean, my mind's churning now about our parish and some of the things that we can consider. So thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who watched this. I know there could be plenty more watching it because I've had several inquiries about the archived version, so many more will be watching it. And for all of those who are here right now, we have another webinar next week, same place, same time, on the topic of knowing ourselves and loving the other. This will be led by Dr. George Stavros, who is the director of the Pastoral Institute, the Danielson Pastoral Institute at Boston University. And he'll be discussing the relationship between humility and healthy narcissism. And please don't get thrown off by healthy narcissism as I did, but it's more social science perspectives through the lens of Eastern Orthodoxy and the approaches to humility and repentance, and particularly for those who are in places of religious leadership, which includes both the priest and the priest's wife. So hopefully you'll tune in again next week. And then the following week, we have another one on Thursday with Bishop John Abdallah about loving thy neighbor, even if he or she is difficult. You've received all of that information in your emails, so please make sure that you register, and hopefully you'll join us again. Thank you, Father Stephen and Pani Daria, and hopefully we will see you again sometime in the next several months.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie.
Okay.